Welcome to Stoned Stories with me, Paige. How are you? Whether you need an escape or just a moment to unwind, you're in the right place. Everyone loves a story, and everyone needs a break. So sit back and let me take you on a gemological journey. And while we're at it, let's get stoned. How are ya? Feeling tired? Maybe you're absolutely crushing life, or maybe you just need a little escape from reality. Whether you're stoned and questioning why pigeons always look like they're on an important mission, or you're completely sober and just love a good story. Well, everyone loves a story, and everyone needs a break. So today, we're talking about one of the oldest celebrities on Earth. A gemstone so famous that kings built crowns around it. Priests claimed it connected them to heaven. Sailors trusted it to keep them alive. Scientists now use it to build spacecraft. And for thousands of years, people believed it was the reason the sky is blue. Not a metaphor. They literally believed the sky was reflecting one absolutely massive sapphire. What if I told you that one gemstone has been worshipped, seared, used to catch cheaters, survived empires, outlived religions, helped us reach space, and is probably sitting inside the phone in your pocket right now? This is the story of Sapphire. Whenever someone says the word sapphire, almost everybody pictures the same thing. Deep blue, royal, expensive, probably sitting on the finger of somebody whose family owns a castle. But here's the crazy part. Blue isn't what makes a sapphire a sapphire. In fact, sapphire comes in almost every color you can imagine. Yellow, pink, purple, green, orange, white, even colorless. If you've ever heard someone say pink sapphire and thought, wait, isn't that just a ruby? You're wrong. Rubies are actually just red sapphires. Well, kind of. We'll get into that little geological identity crisis later. But honestly, the difference between a ruby and a sapphire is one of my favorite things in gemology. It's one of those moments where nature basically says, yeah, I'm going to make this unnecessarily complicated. And before anyone understood chemistry, before anyone knew what aluminum oxide was, before geology, telescopes, before anyone had the slightest clue what Earth even looked like, people still looked up. Every civilization has stared into the sky and asked the same questions. Why is it blue? What's holding everything up? What's beyond it? Today, we answer those questions with astronomy. Thousands of years ago, they answered them with stories, and honestly, their explanations were way cooler. The ancient Persians believed the entire Earth rested on an enormous sapphire pedestal. Not a mountain, not a turtle, not an elephant, one giant sapphire, the biggest sapphire imaginable. The blue sky above us was simply the reflection of that colossal gemstone beneath the Earth. Imagine that. Every sunrise, every sunset, every perfect summer afternoon wasn't the atmosphere scattering sunlight. It was the world's biggest gemstone bouncing its color across the heavens. And if you didn't know anything about light, that's a pretty solid guess. I mean, if someone told me the northern lights were caused by giant opals, I'd at least hear them out. That wasn't the only civilization that saw something divine inside sapphire. In ancient Greece, people believed the stone protected its owner from envy, harm, and dishonesty. Kings wore it, queens wore it. Military leaders carried it, not because they thought it looked pretty, although it definitely did, but because they believed it physically protected them. Imagine buying jewelry today and instead of asking, does this match my outfit? You ask, will this stop my enemies from cursing me? Much different priorities. The Romans loved sapphire just as much. To them, blue represented wisdom, truth, the heavens. Many priests and oracles wore sapphires during ceremonies because they believed the stones allowed them to communicate more clearly with the gods. It's fascinating how often blue became associated with something divine, not just because it looked beautiful, but because almost nothing on Earth is naturally that color. Think about it. Most flowers aren't blue. Animals, very few. Blue food practically doesn't exist. Blue as a color was rare. The sky was blue. The ocean was blue. So naturally, people connected sapphire to things beyond human reach. It wasn't just another pretty rock. It was a piece of heaven. Ancient Egypt had its own relationship with sapphire. The Egyptians adored gemstones. Lapis lazuli usually stole the spotlight, but sapphires were still prized for both beauty and medicine. Ground sapphire was sometimes mixed into eye treatments and cosmetics. Now, before everyone runs off trying to make sapphire face cream, please don't. Ancient medicine also included things like, maybe this leech will fix it. Medical science has come a long way, but it does show something fascinating. People didn't just admire gemstones, they trusted them. They believed these minerals held power, healing, protection, wisdom, and sometimes all three at once. And then there's one of my favorite legends, King Solomon. According to Jewish, Islamic, and medieval traditions, King Solomon possessed a legendary ring or seal. Many later stories claimed it was carved from a sapphire. The seal supposedly granted him authority over spirits, demons, and even animals. Now, did that actually happen? Almost certainly, we're not sure, maybe not. But I absolutely love that one of history's greatest kings wasn't imagined wearing gold for its own sake, or diamonds, or some mythical crystal from another planet. No, people imagined ultimate wisdom resting inside a sapphire. And there's something poetic about that. Across continents, languages, and civilizations that never met one another, people kept arriving at the same conclusion. If there was a gemstone worthy of heaven, worthy of kings and divine power, it was sapphire. Not because they understood what it was, but because of what it made them feel. Wonder. And you know what's funny? We always think ancient people were less intelligent than we are. They weren't. They simply had different information. When they looked at the sky, they didn't have satellites, telescopes. There wasn't physics understood yet. They had imagination. And imagination has always been humanity's first science. Before we explain the universe, we tell stories about it. Sometimes those stories become myths, and sometimes they become religions. Sometimes they even become podcasts. But eventually, people stopped asking, why is the sky blue? And they started asking something completely different. What exactly is this stone? Because the more they searched for sapphire, the stranger it became. It wasn't one color. It was found in more than one place. It hidden inside mountains, washed into rivers, buried beneath volcanoes. Sapphire was quietly forming over millions of years, long before humans ever imagined it was holding up the world. And once we finally understood how it was made, the truth turned out to be just as incredible as the myths. For thousands of years, people believed sapphires came from the heaven. Turns out, the exact opposite is true. To find a sapphire, you have to go deeper than almost anyone ever does. Long before dinosaurs, before flowers, before trees, before the continents even looked remotely like they do today, the ingredients for sapphire were already waiting inside the earth. Not as gemstones, just atoms, tiny little building blocks, completely unaware that one day people would fight wars over them. At its core, sapphire is surprisingly simple. It's made almost entirely from two elements, aluminum and oxygen. That's it. Those two combine to form a mineral called corundum. Now, if you've listened to this podcast before, that name might sound familiar, because corundum is basically gemstone royalty. Every ruby, every sapphire, every pink sapphire, every yellow sapphire, every green sapphire, you get it. They're all corundum. Think of corundum like ice cream. Vanilla is still ice cream. Chocolate is still ice cream. Mint chocolate chip, yeah, it's still ice cream. The same base recipe, just different flavors. Nature does the exact same thing. Pure corundum without any extra ingredients is actually completely colorless, crystal clear. Kind of boring, honestly. It's beautiful, but it doesn't become legendary until nature starts getting messy. As those crystals grow, tiny impurities sneak into their atomic structure. Iron, titanium, chromium. Just a few stray atoms out of billions. And suddenly everything changes. Iron and titanium working together? That creates the deep royal blue we all recognize. A little chromium, pink. Enough chromium, congratulations, it's not a sapphire anymore. Which, if you listen to the last podcast and you want to ask me, I think it's one of the funniest rules in geology. Imagine spending 20 million years growing inside the Earth only for a gemologist to pick you up and say, no, sorry, you're just too red. Nature's like, I literally made them from the exact same mineral. Humans, nah, different name, different price tag, different birthstone. And here's something that completely blew my mind when I first learned it. Rubies are actually rarer than sapphires. Not because corundum itself is rare. Corundum is found all over the world. What's rare is getting just the right amount of chromium without accidentally adding too much iron. It's like baking cookies. Anyone can make dough, but making the perfect cookie every single time, that's the hard part. Nature has been trying for hundreds of millions of years. Now, this is where things get crazier. Because remember how I said sapphires form deep underground? It doesn't just happen anywhere. The Earth has to get incredibly specific. Imagine trying to bake that cake. Except the oven has to stay at exactly the right temperature for millions of years. One wrong ingredient, no sapphire. Too much silica, no sapphire. Wrong pressure, no sapphire. Wrong chemistry, and still no sapphire. Nature is incredibly and unbelievably picky. Most sapphires begin their lives inside metamorphic rocks. These are rocks that have been squeezed, heated, and transformed by enormous tectonic forces. Mountain ranges colliding, continents crashing together, the Earth's crust folding like slow-motion origami. That's where many of history's greatest sapphires were born. Others form inside volcanic rocks. Molten magma cools, minerals crystallize, and every once in a while, corundum gets exactly the conditions it needs. It's basically geological luck, except the lottery takes about 50 million years. And then, after all of that work, pressure, years of heat, crystal growth, the Earth says, actually, I'm going to throw you in a river. Seriously, that's how most gem-quality sapphires are found. Not inside mountains anymore, but in riverbeds. And here's why. Sapphire is incredibly hard. 9 on the Mohs hardness scale. It's only a diamond that ranks higher. That means that while softer rocks slowly crumble away, sapphire barely notices. Rain falls, mountains erode, entire hills can disappear, and the sapphire is still sitting there. Eventually, rivers wash those crystals downstream where they settle into gravel deposits called alluvial deposits. So instead of blasting into mountains, many miners simply search ancient riverbeds, which means your sapphire may have traveled dozens, hundreds of miles before anyone ever picked it up. I love a journey. It's beautiful. Imagine spending 10 million years riding rivers, just waiting for one person to notice you. And if a sapphire can survive that journey, just how tough is it? Well, remember the Mohs hardness scale? We've talked about this before. It's basically geology's way of answering one simple question. What can scratch what? Talc sits at the bottom with a hardness of 1. You can scratch it with your fingernail. Quartz, the mineral found in a lot of kitchen countertops, is a 7. Steel sits around 6.5. Sapphire is a 9, meaning sapphire can scratch almost every other gemstone on Earth. Only diamond, with its perfect carbon structure, can scratch sapphire. So if you ever see someone wearing a sapphire ring, that's been passed down for generations. There's a reason it still looks incredible. It has spent decades, sometimes centuries, surviving encounters with nearly everything else around it. It's basically the cast iron skillet of gemstones. And it's not just hard. It's dense, transparent. It bends light beautifully, which gives it that rich brilliance people have admired for thousands of years. But not all sapphires are created equal. Some become legends, some become the gemstones museums build entire exhibits around. And that all depends on where they were born. Because just like wine, or coffee, or apparently people arguing over pizza, location matters a lot. Take Kashmir. Nestled high in the Himalayas, these sapphires have become almost mythical. In the late 1800s, a landslide exposed an incredible deposit high in the mountains. The stones coming out of Kashmir weren't just blue, they had a soft, almost velvety glow. Gemologists still struggle to describe it. It's not brighter, it's not darker, it's almost like the color floats inside the stone. Collectors today consider fine Kashmir sapphires among the most valuable gemstones on Earth. And here's the cruel part. The deposit was largely exhausted after only a few years. Nature spent hundreds of millions of years making them. Humans needed less than a decade to mine most of them. Then there's Myanmar. Formerly known as Burma, the legendary Magok Valley has produced some of the finest corundum the world has ever seen. We talked a lot about this on our last episode because most people know Magok for its extraordinary rubies. But its sapphires are equally spectacular. Sri Lanka, known for centuries as Ratna Dwipa, the island of gems, has been producing sapphires for over 2,000 years. Walk through certain river valleys there and you're literally walking across one of the oldest gemstone-producing regions in human history. Blue, pink, yellow, green, star sapphires. Sri Lanka has produced almost every variety imaginable. Then almost out of nowhere, Madagascar entered the story. In the 1990s, massive sapphire discoveries completely changed the global gem market. Entire mining towns appeared almost overnight. Thousands of miners flooded into areas that had been quiet forests only months before. It's amazing how quickly humans can build a city once shiny rocks are involved. Australia produces sapphires too. Montana in the United States become famous for beautiful blue and teal sapphires. Thailand, India, Nigeria, Tanzania, sapphires seem to appear almost everywhere. But each location leaves its own fingerprint. Tiny differences in chemistry, tiny differences in geology, and suddenly, gemologists can often make educated guesses about where a sapphire came from. It's almost like every deposit has its own accent. For thousands of years, people searched rivers, climbed mountains, crossed oceans, and dug into the earth, looking for those incredibly blue stones. Some believed they were gifts from heaven, while others believed they held magical powers. One thing remained true. No matter where they were found, they always ended up in the hands of the most powerful people on Earth. Kings, queens, popes, and emperors. Because if sapphire truly represented heaven, who better to wear a piece of heaven than someone who ruled a kingdom? And that's exactly where our story goes next. Because no gemstone has a longer love affair with royalty than sapphire. Crowns, thrones, scepters, royal rings, religious relics. If you started walking through the treasure rooms of Europe, you'd notice something almost immediately. Diamonds are everywhere now. But for most of history, they were not the stars of the show. That title belonged to sapphire. Before diamonds became the universal symbol of wealth, blue sapphires represented something far more important. Not money, legitimacy. If a king wore sapphire, it wasn't just because he could afford it. It was because people believed heaven approved of his rule. Now think about that. A gemstone wasn't simply decoration. It was political propaganda. The deep blue color reminded people of the heavens. And if your crown contained pieces of heaven, well, maybe God really had chosen you. Or whether that was true or not, it certainly made for good marketing. And boy, would it be a reason for me as a queen to say, yeah, I'll buy that sapphire. It makes me look chosen. One of the oldest royal sapphires still surviving today is known as St. Edward Sapphire. Legend says it belonged to Edward the Confessor, the last Anglo-Saxon king of England. According to the story, Edward once gave his ring to a beggar. Years later, pilgrims returning from the Holy Land claimed they'd met that same beggar. Except it wasn't a beggar at all, it was St. John the Evangelist in disguise. He returned the ring to the pilgrims, asking them to deliver it back to the king. And a few days later, Edward died. The sapphire eventually became part of the British crown jewels, where it still sits today. Now, whether every detail of that story is historically accurate, probably not, but that's besides the point. It's a great story. And people wanted sapphire to be a part of miracles, so they believed it. Because sapphire had become more than a gemstone, it had become a symbol of divine favor. By the Middle Ages, that symbolism had only grown stronger. Christian clergy believed sapphire represented heaven, truth, purity, and wisdom. Its color reminded them of the sky, which represents God's kingdom. In the 1200s, Pope Innocent III issued a decree that bishops should wear rings made of solid gold, set with an engraved sapphire. Not ruby, not emerald, sapphire. The stone was meant to symbolize purity of heart, faith, and spiritual authority. So, becoming a bishop, your official work uniform included one of the world's finest gemstones. Not too bad. Of course, people in the Middle Ages weren't exactly known for separating religion, science, and superstition. They believed sapphire could do, well, pretty much everything. Protect you from poison? Sure. Cure eye diseases? Absolutely. Reduce favors? Why not? Prevent envy? Definitely. Shield you from evil? Obviously. The medieval solution to almost every problem seemed to be, have you tried putting a gemstone on it? But my favorite belief, by far, was about cheating. Apparently, sapphire was thought to expose infidelity. There are stories that wives of crusaders were tested using sapphires after their husbands returned from years away at war. Some legends claim the gemstone would change color, grow cloudy, or somehow lose its brilliance. If its wearer had been unfaithful, imagine surviving years of medieval warfare, crossing continents, finally making it home, only to have your relationship judged by a rock. And honestly, that's a lot of pressure for everybody involved. Sailors had their own relationships with sapphire. You see, the ocean was unpredictable, and storms appeared without warning. Maps were incomplete, and if you disappeared, that was usually the end of story. So many sailors carried sapphires as protective talismans. The stone was believed to calm the sea, guide travelers, and prevent drowning. It's another example of something we've seen throughout history. Whenever humans stepped into the unknown, they brought gemstones with them. Not because the stones changed the world, but because they changed how people felt about facing it. How brave! Sometimes hope is its own kind of survival tool. While Europe was filling churches with sapphires, the East had been developing its own extraordinary traditions for centuries. In Hindu astrology, blue sapphire is associated with Shani, the planet Saturn. Now, this isn't your everyday horoscope kind of thing. Blue sapphire is considered one of the most powerful gemstones in Vedic astrology. Powerful enough that people are often advised not to wear one until it's been tested first. Seriously. Some traditions recommend placing the stone under your pillow or wearing it briefly to see how your life changes before committing to it. Because if Saturn favors you, the sapphire may supposedly bring incredible success, discipline, wealth, and wisdom. But if Saturn doesn't, well, traditional belief says it can just as quickly bring hardship. Now imagine buying jewelry and the salesperson says, so, this might completely transform your life or absolutely ruin your week. No refunds. Well, whether you believe any of that or not, it's incredible how much respect sapphire commanded. It wasn't treated casually, it was treated carefully, almost cautiously, because people believed this stone mattered. Buddhism developed a very different relationship with sapphire. Rather than power, it became associated with inner peace. Meditation, mental clarity. Many Buddhists believed sapphire encouraged calm thinking, reduced distractions, and helped focus the mind during spiritual practice. Which makes sense. Have you ever stared into a really nice sapphire? It's hypnotic. That color doesn't scream for attention. It sort of pulls you in. One of the most important traditions in Hindu culture is something called the Navaratna, meaning the 9 gems. I love this. Each gemstone represents one of the major celestial bodies. Together, they're believed to create balance, protection, and harmony. Sapphire holds the place connected to Saturn, standing alongside ruby, emerald, diamond, pearl, coral, cat's eye, yellow sapphire, and hessonite garnet. The idea is beautiful. Instead of one gemstone being the most powerful, each one contributes something unique, kind of like the Avengers, except shinier. And then there are the stars. Not the ones in the sky, the ones inside sapphire. If you've never seen a star sapphire, do yourself a favor after this episode, Google one, seriously. It's one of nature's coolest magic tricks. Instead of sparkling like a normal gemstone, a bright, 6-rayed star appears across the surface. Move the stone and the star moves with it. It looks alive. For centuries, people believed these stars represented faith, hope, destiny, and others believed they offered divine protection. Honestly, if I found one before I understood mineral inclusions, I'd probably think it was magical too. I still do, to be fully honest, okay? Because it kind of looks like it just shouldn't exist. By now, you've probably noticed something. No matter where you go, Persia, India, England, Rome, Sri Lanka, the stories change. The religions change, the languages change, but sapphires never really change. Everyone looked at the same blue stone and somehow saw something greater than themselves. Something about it being heaven, wisdom, destiny, protection. It became a mirror reflecting whatever people hoped for most. And then something happened that no king, no priest, and certainly no ancient Persian could have ever imagined. Humanity stopped believing sapphire connected us to the heavens. Instead, we started using sapphire to actually reach them. Because the next chapter of Sapphire's story doesn't happen in castles or churches or temples. It happens inside laboratories, rocket ships, smartphones, and satellites. And some of the most advanced technology humanity has ever built. Turns out, the ancient civilizations were wrong about one thing. The sky wasn't made of sapphire, but the future just might be. For thousands of years, people believed sapphire was magical. Eventually, science caught up, and somehow it made sapphire even more incredible. One of my favorite things about this gemstone is that every once in a while, science looks at something humans have admired for thousands of years and says, yeah, they're right. Not about the magic, but about the fact that this material is extraordinary. And they realize that sapphire isn't just beautiful, it's one of the most useful natural materials we've ever discovered. Remember when we talked about hardness, 9 on the Mohs scale, second only to diamond? Well, it turns out that's a pretty useful characteristic when you're building technology that has to survive the real world. Because your phone doesn't care if something is historically significant, it cares whether it scratches. The tiny camera lenses on many smartphones often protected by synthetic sapphire. High-end watches, sapphire crystal. Not glass, sapphire. Barcode scanners, industrial lasers, scientific instruments, medical equipment, the windows protecting delicate sensors. Many of them are all sapphire. And before somebody asks, yes, synthetic sapphire is still sapphire. Nobody is grinding up priceless gemstones to make iPhone camera lenses. Scientists learned how to grow sapphire crystals in laboratories over a century ago. Chemically, they're identical. Same atoms, same crystal structure, same incredible durability. The only difference is one took millions of years and the other took a few weeks. Nature probably isn't thrilled about that, but it's kind of wild to think about. Ancient kings spent fortunes just to own one sapphire. Meanwhile, you're carrying around one every single day and you never even realized it. Next to memes, DoorDash notifications, and 37 screenshots you'll never look at again. History has a sense of humor. But phones are just the beginning. Remember how ancient sailors trusted sapphire to protect them at sea? Today, engineers trust sapphire to survive space. Sapphire can handle temperatures that would destroy ordinary glass. It's incredibly resistant to scratching. It doesn't react easily with chemicals, it transmits lights beautifully, and it's remarkably strong under pressure. Those qualities make it perfect for some of the harshest environments humans have ever created. Missile guidance systems, infrared sensors, aircraft windows, protective covers for scientific instruments, even spacecraft. Think about that. Thousands of years ago, people believed sapphires connected Earth to the heavens. And today, pieces of sapphire literally leave Earth to help us study the heavens. I don't know if that's poetic or if geology just has an incredible sense of irony. Maybe both. One of Sapphire's biggest modern jobs is helping to produce LED lights inside televisions, streetlights, computer screens, and countless electronics are often grown on thin sapphire wafers. Without sapphire, modern lighting technology would look very different, which means the gemstone that ancient Persians believed painted the sky blue now helps produce the blue light shining from millions of screens around the world. Very full circle. Sapphire is also used in solar energy. It's resistant to heat and ultraviolet radiation. It makes it valuable in manufacturing components designed to withstand decades of exposure to sunlight. Medicine can also use sapphire too because it's biocompatible, meaning the human body generally tolerates it extremely well. That also blows my mind because sapphire appears in specialized surgical instruments, medical implants, and precision devices where durability and cleanliness are absolutely essential. Again, not exactly what medieval doctors had in mind, although they'd probably feel pretty validated. We told you the blue rock was useful. Fair enough. And here's something that fascinates me as well. The more advanced our technology becomes, the more often we find ourselves using materials that nature perfected millions of years before. Carbon became diamonds, quartz became electronics, silicon became computer chips, and corundum became sapphire. Sometimes the future doesn't require inventing something new. It requires finally understanding what was already there. Of course, for most people, sapphire still means jewelry, engagement rings, family heirlooms, birthstones. September babies, this one is yours. And while trends come and go, sapphire has somehow remained timeless. Maybe that's because blue never really goes out of style. Or maybe it's because sapphire has always represented something bigger than fashion. It's impossible to talk about modern sapphires without talking about one ring, probably the most famous sapphire ring in history. In 1981, Prince Charles proposed to Lady Diana Spencer with an extraordinary 12-carat oval blue sapphire. Wow. It was surrounded by 14 brilliant diamonds. And at the time, people were shocked. Not because it was beautiful, because it wasn't custom made. Diana chose it from a jeweler's catalog. Anyone, at least theoretically, could have purchased the same ring. Some critics thought that made it less special. History disagreed, and so do I. The moment Diana began wearing it, the entire world fell in love with sapphire all over again. Decades later, the ring passed to Prince William, who used it to propose to Catherine. Today, it's one of the most recognizable rings and pieces of jewelry on Earth, a modern fairy tale built around one very ancient gemstone. And for thousands of years, it's funny. People believed sapphire represented loyalty, wisdom, truth, and lasting love. Without even realizing it, that ring carried every one of those stories into the 21st century. Whether people knew the history or not, they felt it. Some traditions survive without anyone remembering why. Now, when we started today's story, I told you that ancient Persians believed the sky was blue because the earth rested on a giant sapphire. Today, we smile at that idea. We know about Rayleigh scattering, atmospheric modules, physics. Science gave us the real answer. But I don't think that makes the old story any less beautiful, because myths were never really about getting the facts right. They were about trying to make sense of a world that inspired awe. And I think we still do exactly the same thing. We just tell different stories now. Instead of saying sapphire holds up the sky, We say aluminum oxide formed under immense pressure through metamorphic rock and igneous processes over hundreds of millions of years. That's a more accurate explanation, but somehow it's just as miraculous. Think about everything this one gemstone has witnessed. It formed before dinosaurs existed. It watched mountains rise and rivers carve valleys. It waited underground while civilizations were born, languages evolved, while empires collapsed, and eventually someone picked it up. A king wore it, a bishop blessed it, a sailor trusted it, a scientist studied it. An engineer put it inside a spacecraft, and now you're listening to a podcast about it. It's a pretty incredible journey for a rock. And maybe that's why I love gemology so much. Because every gemstone is proof that nature has been creating masterpieces long before humans ever learned to appreciate them. The stories aren't just ours, they're Earth's. We're simply lucky enough to inherit them. If you enjoyed today's story, I hope the next time you see a sapphire, whether it's in a museum, a jewelry store, or protecting the camera on your phone, you'll remember that you're looking at a crystal that humans once believed painted the sky, eventually helped us reach the stars. Not bad for 2 atoms and a little bit of geological luck. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me today. Tune into next episode because, as always, it's sure to be a gem.